Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Andrea Klunder is an entrepreneur who has worn many hats. Today, we talk about some of the experiences she's had, the bumps in the road of being both creative and self employed, and her pivot into podcast creation and consulting that has sent her off in a new direction. Please welcome Andrea Klunder. Andrea, welcome. I'm so pleased to have you on Bump in the Road today. If you would, give us a little background on you and tell us your story.
Absolutely. So I am a podcast host, producer, editor, consultant, coach, mentor, teacher. But I haven't always been that. I've been that for about the last 5 years of my life. And prior to that, I have had many different identity shifts and roles that I've taken on. I always kind of dislike when a podcast starts with, tell me how you got to where you are today. And somebody says, well, I was born in, and they go like all the way back to early childhood. But I do kind of think that my life has always been on a trajectory of thinking about what I wanted to do when I grew up and having a plan in mind for what that career was going to be. And I've always been very career focused, but not career focused in terms of how can I have a career that's going to make me the most money, or how can I have this high power position. I've always wanted to have a career that aligns with my identity of who I am, that somehow showcases some aspect of me. So most of my life, I grew up wanting to be a professional singer. And I remember singing my first solo in church when I was 4 years old. I don't know if I actually remember it or if I only remember it because I've heard, stories told to me for so long. Uh, but I always wanted to be a singer and a performer. And I knew that. And I went to college for vocal music performance. But because I wanted to be sensible, I had a dual major in music education, secondary education music. And I hated it. I had loved singing. I had loved performing. I had taken voice lessons. I had been in choir. And then when I got to college, uh, it just fell apart because it became such hard work. I didn't get to choose really what I sang. My teachers got to choose what I sang. And any time that I spent not singing or not practicing uh, was like wasted time. And everyone else in the School of Music was very, very serious and very focused. And I just, for the life of me, as an 18-year-old who has a lot of interests, like, yes, I wanted to be a performer. Yes, I wanted to sing. But I had a lot of interests. I had things that I loved to do. I loved my general education English classes. I loved writing. I actually enjoyed a lot of my science classes with labs, but it seemed like everyone was like, well, how many hours did you spend in the practice room with a piano and no windows, in the School of Music? And so that was my first sort of identity crisis, where my freshman year, by the end of my freshman year of college, I knew that I did not want to continue doing this, but I had always been a singer. I had always been a music major. I had always wanted to do vocal performance. So if I wasn't doing that, suddenly I didn't have an identity. I didn't know who I was. There were all these other majors, but none of them felt like that identity that I had created for myself. So,
But did you have to actually abandon that identity to move
well,
forward?
when you're 18, things are dramatic, right? And you're an
Yes.
18-year-old performer and theater person. You tend to look at the most dramatic aspect of it. And so I changed my major a few times officially and a few times unofficially. And I ended up finding myself in the communications department doing mass communication with an emphasis in film and video and learning more about the production side of media. And that's what I graduated with. I thought for sure I'd get a film and video production job out of college. I did not. I ended up working at the Lyric Opera of Chicago, which is funny that I went back to music. But I was working in the technical and production side now. And that was always meant to be a day job. That was never meant to be my career working in arts administration. I always thought, well, I'm just going to work this job so that I can pay the bills. I can live in a cool place like Chicago until I get my big break, whatever that is. I started doing theater again in small theaters. I started performing again. And I was looking for what was that next thing that I was going to do. And I started thinking about graduate school. And one thing that I had sort of been doing kind of since college was yoga. I'd been practicing yoga. I'd discovered meditation. And I was doing yoga on and off at that time only because I did not like exercising. But I sort of knew that it was important to have some kind of physical activity in your life. And the only other exercise I liked to do was playing tennis. And tennis is hard because you have to coordinate with another person. You have to find a court that you can play on. Like it's more difficult to be consistent with that. So I'd been doing yoga on and off. And my roommate said to me, you know, before you go to grad school, you should get your yoga teaching certificate so that you can do that as a part time job while you're in grad school rather than like waiting tables or something. And I was like, oh, great idea. Why don't I do that? So I did end up getting my yoga teaching certificate. I did not end up going to graduate school. And I started teaching yoga on the side while I was working my office day job. And I loved it. And I mean, I started fantasizing about becoming a full time yoga teacher. The idea of being able to wear yoga pants all day, every day was very appealing. I looked at my yoga teachers who I sort of put on this pedestal and idealized at that time. This was in my 20s. And I was thinking, this is the lifestyle. You get to like go around to these different studios and hang out and have tea with your students afterwards. And plus, yoga had been so transformative for me. Like, of course, in the beginning, I started dabbling, but the more I started doing it, it became more of a philosophy. It became more of a way of looking at life. I remember one of the things that triggered my first business idea was I was taking the commuter train home from the downtown area of Chicago. So if anyone's familiar with Chicago, they know the L, the elevated train. And I was taking the L home and I was looking around and everyone looked so tired at the end of the 9 to 5 workday. They looked in my memory, it was also raining outside. I don't know if that's really true, but in my memory, this is how it happened. It was raining, it was gray, everyone looked really tired,
Lightning,
lightning and
thunder, yeah.
thunder and, you know, um, and just I was thinking, this is not the adult lifestyle that I signed up for. Like, I thought once you got done with school, that was when like the real fun began. And that was when, your real life would start and everything would become like exciting and all these possibilities would open. But everyone just looked tired at the end of the workday. And I didn't want that. And I knew I had to get out. So I started looking at what it would take to start my own yoga business. And at first, I was just thinking I would be a teacher and I would travel around from studio to studio. And I discovered that it's really hard to make money that way. It's really hard to have any kind of consistent anything. And you're spending all your time traveling around the city. And so then it occurred to me, oh, well, if I create my own yoga studio, then I get to be in one place. I get to wear yoga pants all day. I get to sort of create the atmosphere and create the rules and invite in other yoga teachers and other practitioners. And then my idea got bigger and bigger. And in 2008, I started what was called Infuse Yoga Spa in the Lincoln Park neighborhood in Chicago. And we started out inside of a chiropractic clinic. So I had been teaching classes part time at this chiropractic clinic in a tiny studio. And I mean, we could only fit like maybe 6 or 7 people doing yoga in there at any time. And I started there, subletting that space from her. And we also would do, whenever we weren't having a yoga class, practitioners could use the space to do like like a massage or bodywork appointment, or like a Reiki energy healing appointment, or we had some people doing private yoga sessions.
So you're really almost forming an integrative
Yeah,
medicine
and
group.
I wanted to call it a spa. I had been in Seattle recently and there was a place that I went that was called a yoga spa and I like loved this idea. So I was calling it Infuse Yoga Spa. And that one little room, we started maxing it out. We couldn't fit any more people in. I needed to make more revenue because at that point, I was funding this whole thing based on a little bit of savings that I had in the bank, like a very little bit. If you've ever worked in arts administration in a nonprofit, you know I was not making very much money in my previous career. And some loans from my parents and credit cards. So I wasn't really paying myself at that point. I was covering bills, I was paying teachers, and I was buying my groceries with my credit cards every week. And I just kept thinking like, "Oh, this is eventually gonna grow." Like, I made a business plan, I made sales projections, like, I know how this is gonna go, but of course, business doesn't always go the way that your business plan and your sales projections
I
make,
I don't think I've ever seen a business plan that actually
right?
panned out.
Exactly. And so, I knew I needed to grow. I decided to leave the chiropractic clinic so that I could have my own space that was bigger, because if I have more space, then I can have more people, then I'll make more money, even though it meant taking on about 3 times the expenses. My expenses tripled, and I moved around the corner 2 blocks away so that I wouldn't lose anybody, and, I couldn't make it work. I was 2 years in the chiropractic place, and then I signed a 3-year lease on my storefront studio, and it was gorgeous. It was this beautiful, like, the building was built around the turn of the century, around the early 1900s. It had these high vaulted ceilings, hardwood floors, all these little vintage touches. I had the yoga studio in the front, and then in the back, there had used to be an apartment, and that apartment I converted into treatment rooms so that we could have services happening while classes were going on. And I had a few teachers working, and eventually I just wasn't making enough money. And I kept pushing and I'm pushing and pushing. And eventually I had to move out of my apartment because I couldn't afford my rent anymore. And I actually started living in the back of the yoga studio, which, I mean, it used to be an apartment. It had a full kitchen, it had a full bath, it had, a full bathtub, it had everything. So it was totally livable, but it wasn't my intention, because then I had to drop, one of the spot. It was a 2 bedroom. So I had to drop one of the treatment rooms. And I knew that I was in a downward spiral. Also, besides financially, I was not healthy because I was stressed out all the time. And here I was trying to teach yoga, trying to teach meditation, trying to do therapeutic body work to help people release their pain and their stress and have a healthier lifestyle. And I was running myself ragged. I didn't enjoy teaching my classes. I hardly even had time to work with my clients because I was so busy trying to figure out the marketing, trying to figure out the scheduling, trying to cover for teachers who didn't show up for their classes, trying to deal with payroll and bookkeeping and the water heater going out in the building and rain coming in and problems with the upstairs residential neighbors. And my life was falling apart. I had no social life. I had I didn't even enjoy practicing yoga at that time because it was the same thing that happened in the music school. Yoga became work, and it became a point of stress rather than something that I loved and enjoyed.
That was an incredibly brave choice to move into that larger studio.
I was so naive. I thought for sure like things were working in the small space. We were filling our classes. People were loving it. It just followed that it was like the whole goldfish bowl theory, like you put a goldfish in a small bowl, it's going to stay small, but then when you put it in a bigger environment, it just keeps growing and growing.
And 2008 was not the best economic time to be
No,
expanding
and people
either.
told me I was crazy for starting a business at that time in the first place, and I just I couldn't I also heard from a business coach that I was working with through the Women's Business Development Center. I mean, she had a lot of concerns about my business plan, and she tried to get me to change things and to see things differently, but I was stubborn. But she also said that when you have an idea and a desire to start a business, you don't wanna wait too long because eventually, like, all the reasons why not to do it are going to pile up, and that spark and that energy that you have is going to diminish over time. So yes, you want to have plans. Yes, you want to have savings. The advice that I ignored was that you should have 2 to 3 years of your own living expenses saved, like available in cash, so that you can live off your savings for 2 to 3 years before you start. Working for $35,000 a year at a nonprofit arts organization in the city of Chicago, I was never going to save 2 to 3 years of living expenses. It's impossible. And so I did the math at one point, and I was like, yeah, I'll be like 70 years old by the time I can start my business.
Well, so here you are, demoralized after following this fantastic path of wanting to help and heal people. What happened? Did you have to file for bankruptcy?
Not right away. So I just started doing really shady stuff. I started like shorting my rent a little bit to see how long I could get away with that. I started not paying utilities to see how long I could get away with that. I actually remember one time when I figured out a way that I could use my personal PayPal account to pay my business PayPal account using a credit card, like all kinds of weird stuff to like shuffle money around. And eventually, what I had to do was I had to write out that 3-year lease, because if I would have canceled my lease, immediately what happens is that in a commercial lease in Chicago, if you cancel it, you have to move out, and you're immediately responsible for the balance of that lease, and the landlord can sue you for it. Well, if I didn't have 1 month's rent, how was I going to pay the last like 6 months of my lease immediately up front? So I wrote it out. I tried to do as much as I could. I actually started renting out the treatment rooms on Airbnb and having Airbnb guests, which actually, though maybe not totally legal at the time, I didn't realize it wasn't legal, but I discovered later that it wasn't really legal. Uh, at the time, I was making more money off of Airbnb than I was off of yoga, which seemed ridiculous to me. But that's how I was getting by. And I just wrote out that lease until the end, didn't renew, shut down the business, took my tens of thousands of dollars of credit card debt, moved into an apartment in a different neighborhood, and immediately sunk into this very deep depression. It was like I could keep pushing and pushing and pushing and going until the business was gone. And then suddenly I was left with what exactly? So I sunk into this depression. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a business. I didn't have any money. I had friends, but I didn't have friends because I hadn't been nurturing my social relationships. I hadn't been building those relationships. And I didn't know what to do. And I didn't want to do anything. There was nothing. I didn't want to do yoga. I didn't want to teach. I didn't want to. Some people were like, oh, well, you can start a new business. And I was like, I have no money. And other people were like, oh, just brush up your resume. You can just go get a job. And I'm like, you and I have talked about this before, Pat. Once you have been self employed and you've worked for yourself, it is almost inconceivable to think of getting a job.
It's very hard to go back into
Yeah,
that box.
it's extremely difficult. Uh,
I just had this image of all these gray people on the gray L, the thunder and the lightning. It's like, I don't wanna go there.
Absolutely not. And so what I did was nothing. I really didn't. And I did have to sort out. I did end up eventually filing bankruptcy. I tried to avoid it. I cashed out. I did have IRA savings, investment savings accounts for retirement. I cashed those out and tried to pay off some of my debt. I did pick up weird part time jobs here and there, like a barista job for a little while, and teaching yoga to kindergartners. I picked up a couple of kindergarten yoga classes, and I did some marketing for an independent documentary filmmaker, some grassroots marketing, like just weird little contractor jobs here and there, just to kind of get by and try to figure it out. But the one thing that I did like, that I was interested in, that I could focus my energy on, was listening to podcasts. And I was listening to lifestyle podcasts like health and wellness, yoga, meditation. I was listening to entrepreneurial podcasts because there was still something in the back of my mind that was like, there's something entrepreneurial. And after a while, I was thinking, well, I don't know how to turn podcasting into a business, but I see these other podcasters, or more accurately, I hear them. I hear these other podcasters, and they have businesses, and they have thriving communities, and they have workshops that they do, and retreats that they do, and they have all these amazing people that they get to connect with through their podcasts. Maybe I could start a podcast. It doesn't seem too terribly expensive. I have a background in broadcast, even though I had been learning broadcast stuff like in the late 90s, and technology between the late 90s and when was this, like 2014, 2015 ish? Vastly different, vastly different technology. And I have that natural desire to be a performer and to use my voice. So maybe these things can start to come together. And I spent about a year researching how to podcast because I didn't have any money, right? So I couldn't hire a consultant. I couldn't pay for a class. I couldn't hire an editor. I had to just figure it out with whatever free stuff I could scrap together online. And I started The Creative Imposter. And that idea for that show came out of this concept of imposter syndrome, which was,
Talk about imposter syndrome
yeah.
a
So
little. Yeah.
imposter syndrome is, well, it's used primarily, it came from an academic setting. So it was originally used to describe people in academia who are very accomplished, very intelligent, very well researched, who feel a challenge when it comes to publishing and presenting their work because they're like, well, who am I? I'm not really an expert in this. It's if I put myself out there, people are going to find out that I'm a fraud, that I'm not really this like PhD expert, whatever it is. And it comes up not just for academia, though, it comes up for performers a lot of times.
Oh, I think it's relevant for almost everybody because, they always say walk the walk before, you really know what you're doing. And I think there's that element of having to be something you're not quite
Yeah.
yet in order to move
Yeah,
forward.
exactly. But, my work was always so tied up with my identity that as soon as I closed the yoga studio, I was no longer a business owner. I was no longer a yoga studio owner, and I was barely a yoga teacher at that point. So if I was not those things that I had kind of hung my identity on at a party, at a networking event, whatever. Oh, hi, I'm Andrea. Oh, hey, Andrea. What do you do? I'm a yoga studio owner, right? Like, what do you do, Andrea? Sit around in my house and try not to leave the covers of my bed if I can avoid it. Like that was my new identity. And it made it really hard. So, this idea of the creative imposter is what you were saying, Pat. It's like taking this idea of feeling like a fraud, feeling like you're not good enough, feeling that self doubt, feeling like, people, if I say I'm a podcaster, but I just started, like, they're going to think that I'm making something up. They're going to think that I don't really know what I'm doing with podcasting. And to a degree, I didn't know what I was doing, right? But I learned and I figured it out. And so I think that as a creative person, you're constantly putting yourself in those positions where you are kind of an imposter in the beginning, but you have to be because you have to do the thing to figure out how to do the thing.
Well, you can't evolve creatively unless you take on some risk and put
Yeah.
yourself out there. And everything doesn't always work. You will fail. But I think you learn as more from your failures than you do from your
Oh,
successes.
absolutely. Like, could I, if I could, people always say, like, if you could go back in time, would you do things differently, or would you want to have not had that experience? I mean, yes, I can see a lot of things that I would have done differently or could have done differently. And yes, I would love to have saved myself that pain and suffering. I mean, it's easy for me to talk about now, but I had so much shame around that failure. I had so much shame. It was hard for me to talk about for a very long time because I felt that I had personally failed. I had let everyone else that was a part of my business down. I had let my clients down. I had let the other teachers down. I had let myself down. I had let my family down because they had loaned me money and I couldn't pay it back. Like all these people that I let down, and I had this shame. So it was almost like when I started this new thing of podcasting, I was almost afraid to tell people that I was starting a new new thing. Because I was like, "Oh my god, I failed so bad at the last one." What am I doing?
What did your
You
parents
know, my
say?
parents are the best. They they have always been so supportive. I don't know how I won the parent lottery, but they have never I mean, I remember as a child one time I told them I wanted to grow up to be a belly dancer, and they were because I saw it on TV, like, with and they had cool costumes, and they were like, "Okay." You know, and I mean, that's fine. Or if I told them, "Oh, I wanna take dance lessons," or, "Oh, I wanna take voice lessons," or, "Oh, I wanna do this," they would always try to find a way to make it happen, and they would never tell me I couldn't do something. That's both a blessing and a curse, I guess.
Oh, I think it's a blessing. Was there a specific incident that really turned you around and got you out of depression and got you moving forward? Or was it more of a gradual sequence of
It was
events?
more gradual, I would say. So I always like to say podcasting saved me from depression, bankruptcy, and imposter syndrome. And it really was by finding this new thing that I could do. And like I said, when I started the Creative Imposter, I didn't know how to quote unquote monetize it or make it into a business. I didn't know what I would even have been selling. It was just something I wanted to do. And I started doing it, putting one foot in front of the other. And what happened was people were really interested in what I was doing. And people started saying, "Oh, that's so cool you started a podcast. I wanna start a podcast. Can you help me do that? Can you show me?" And I would just, meet people for coffee or hang out or whatever, and I'd be like, "Oh, yeah, you need this software and this hardware and this microphone and do this, and this, and then you sign up for this service." And I kept doing that, and people kept asking me questions, and I was like, "Wait a second. I should be charging for this advice." So I started doing little podcasting classes. And then on my show, I just put it out there and I said, "Hey, if you've ever thought of starting your own podcast, I can help you. Why don't you sign up to have a call with me and see if I can help you launch your own show?" And somebody did. Somebody scheduled, somebody who was a listener who I had never met before, who was in California, signed up and we talked about starting her show, and she was like, "Yeah, I wanna sign up to work with you. How do I do that, and how much does it cost?" And I didn't know because I didn't think anyone would do it. So I was like, "Okay, I'll get back to you. I'll send you a proposal," because I didn't know what it would cost. I didn't know what it would look like. I didn't know how she could sign up to work with me. I had no idea. And so, I figured it out. I charged way too little, but it was fine, you know? And we figured it out. We did a series of sessions. I sort of figured out what challenges somebody has with getting started, and she was gonna edit her own show, and then we met so that I to do one session where I could teach her how to edit her show. We got 5 minutes into that training session. She had booked me for an hour. We got 5 minutes in and she's like, "Okay, Andrea, I'm gonna stop you right here. I already know enough to know I never want to edit my own podcast. I don't wanna do this part. Can I just hire you to do it?" And I was like, "Oh, can she hire? Why, yes. Yes, you can hire me to do it." And so that was sort of how this business evolved. The yoga studio business was, I want to do this thing. I love doing this thing. So the yoga studio really in retrospect was all about me, right? It was all about I want to do this thing. I want to help people. This is how I want to help them. This is how I want to show up. This is what I want to offer to them. But the podcasting business happened in the reverse order. I just started doing something that I thought was interesting, and people started asking me for what they wanted. People started asking me for help. And so then I could create something that I loved doing, that I had expertise in, that I knew people wanted. And that was how my services started. And it just grew from there. I started Podcast Envy. That's more of my show about the craft and culture of podcasting. So that's a little bit more of my marketing angle. I started going to conferences. I started speaking at neighborhood classes. And then there was another turning point, and this is a whole other thing, but just briefly, where I started working with high school students. And that was another imposter thing. My partner came home one day from his high school video teaching job. He was teaching video production to high schoolers. And he said, "Hey, the organization that I work for, they're looking for someone to teach digital journalism to high school students who have uh, learning disabilities and autism and Down syndrome, and I put your name in. And I was like, uh, I don't know how to teach journalism. I don't know how to work with high schoolers with diverse learning challenges. I didn't even know it was called diverse learning at that time. I'm like, I can't do that. And he's like, nobody has that skill set. Are you kidding? Where are they going to find a teacher who has those skill sets? You're perfect. And so then I started working with youth and mentoring them, and that's an ongoing program called Power Your Story. We've been working together for a few years, and I think all these little things, all these little opportunities just presented themselves because I started down a path of doing something that was interesting to me, and I stayed open and curious. And it took a long time. I was still working, I was teaching at the high school, doing these like random consulting, launch consulting and editing jobs here and there. And I was also working almost full time at a children's play space and coffee shop as their events manager because it took time for that business to evolve. And I had to piece together some kind of income. So I think just getting out of that was just a very long process of being able to step into this new creative identity, to own that idea that if you focus on like something that you love to do, eventually the identity shapes itself. So it's like, that all those cliches, like if you want to be, do, just starting down that creative path and slowly digging myself out of it. And yeah, when once, filing bankruptcy was again one of those things. It's like, oh, I'm so ashamed that I had to file bankruptcy. Like, how can I ever admit that I had to file bankruptcy? And honestly, it wasn't that bad. It was like tens of thousands of credit card debt just went away. It just went away. And my credit score took a tiny hit. It didn't even affect my credit score all that much. Like, yes, if I had wanted to buy a house or get a car loan or something like that, it would have been a problem. But I wasn't trying to do any of that stuff immediately. So it wasn't the end of the world. It ended up really being helpful. And, people put it in perspective for me. They're like, do you think that Citibank is gonna suffer because you didn't pay them their, $5,000 back or whatever? Citibank's gonna be fine. Like, don't worry about. They're like, "You've already paid them enough in interest over your principal that it's fine." And I was like, "Yeah, why am I feeling like I let Citibank down? This is ridiculous," you know?
But what advice would you give to somebody, particularly now with COVID-19? So many businesses are really hurting. People are debating, do I even keep it open? Do I keep it going? What do I do? How do I move forward? What advice would you give to
Yeah,
somebody?
this is the opportunity to really dig deep. And, a lot of businesses aren't gonna make it. That's the real truth. But even if a business doesn't make it, and I have anxiety about this, about a lot of the local businesses that I love, and I'm like, I don't wanna see that business close. I don't wanna see that business fail. I want them to thrive, but I also can't, like, single-handedly support that business and help them be successful. But what you have to remember is even if a business doesn't make it through this, you can make it through this, and you can do something else. And it might not feel good, and it might be hard, and it might take like every ounce of energy that you can muster up. But we are inherently creative and resourceful people. And sometimes you need to like dig into that. Now, some businesses will thrive and some businesses are continuing to thrive at this time. When I look at the clients that I support, so I work with a lot of people who are small business owners and entrepreneur who have podcasting as part of their outreach strategy or part of their value add strategy for their clients. And I have some clients who make their primary income from speaking at public events. And I asked one of my clients when all this started to happen, I was like, "Oh my god, he's going to stop making the podcast for sure because I his business is going to be in the toilet and he's not going to be able to pay me." Well, I reached out to him just to kind of get a feel for how things were going, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I just lost about 75% of my income overnight because all those speaking and training jobs, they're all
They're
gone."
all gone.
And I was like, "Oh my god, what are you gonna do?" And he's like, "I don't know yet." He's like, "But I'll figure out something, I'm not worried." And I thought, okay, you must have a lot of savings in the bank, because he also has 2 kids, and a wife, and, she has a job as well, but I was like, how could he not be worried? What is that panic in me is like, "Oh my god, income." And he's pivoted. And so instead of doing live speaking in-person events, he reached out to the professional organizations in his industry, and they're looking for ways to support their members. He started doing these online facilitation calls with their members, where the organization is paying him to support the other business owners. He started doing online trainings. There's a lot of shifts that you can make and pivots that you can make in your business, but you've got to get creative and look for, what do other people need right now that I can support them with, even if maybe it wasn't part of my original business model. How can I get creative and shift and look for those new opportunities? And then, like I said, if it doesn't survive, if it doesn't work out, take a pause, take a breath. You're still here. What can you do?
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life. Bump in the Road is a production of Cancer Road Trip. Subscribe to the podcast, follow us on social media at Cancer Road Trip, and you can learn more at www.cancerroadtrip.com. Until next time, be safe and be well.